once I realized motherhood is a relationship I'm a part of, and caregiving is the work that I'm doing. Neither of those things are me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still here. And that's
Yeah.
important and that matters.
Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast, where we discuss all things identity, self-compassion, and fulfillment within and beyond motherhood. I'm Emily Rose Hardy, a mindset and self-love coach for moms. I am a firm believer that to be able to take care of our children, we must take care of ourselves first. This is not a parenting podcast. No, this is a podcast where we will challenge the societal expectations of what it means to be a mom, demystify the perfect mom myth, and learn to love ourselves. You are worthy, mama. Let's do this.
Hello. Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. I have to say, I know I always say I'm really excited for these episodes, and I always am. I always make sure we have really incredible guests and really incredible conversations planned. But today's episode is something that I'm like a little extra excited for. I have been following Hannah for a while on Instagram since before I did this podcast, and she's always been somebody that I'm like, okay, she would be an incredible guest to come on and just talk about motherhood. She talks about motherhood in a way that just clicks. Like there's something about the way that she positions what it means to be a mother that when I hear it, I'm like, this is it. This makes so much sense. She's really all about talking about how motherhood is not necessarily the job of caregiving. It's more the relationship that we have with our children. And how those two pieces come together is really interesting. And I think it's something that we haven't really covered in such a concise way here on the Worthy Mother podcast. I am so excited to be doing it. I think you will also hear it and say, I've got some things to think about if you've never really thought about motherhood in this way. So I'm really excited to introduce you to Hannah Olson. Hannah, can you go ahead and just tell us about yourself and your family and all of what you do, just in a nutshell?
Absolutely. First of all, I just want to say thank you. It's always so helpful to hear when people hear my message and they get it because it is a little bit more of an abstract concept that I know takes a little bit of mulling over in order for people to really understand what I'm trying to say. And because motherhood is something that is so important to all of us, I'm sure all the people listening to this podcast, it can almost feel a little bit off-putting when I talk about motherhood the way that I do. So I would just invite everyone, if you're unfamiliar, if this is your first exposure to me, to have a little bit of an open mind as we go into this conversation, because I promise that I am passionate about motherhood, and that is why I do what I do, because I want to make motherhood available for everyone in the way that they want it. So we'll talk more about that. But I'm Hannah and I live in Utah. I grew up in California, came out to Utah for school, met my husband here. We've been married 10 years and we always knew we wanted to have a big family. I come from a family of 6 kids. And so I always thought that I wanted to have 5 or 6 kids. At the same time, it wasn't like I always dreamed about the day I would become a mom. I wasn't one of those people that was just like counting that down the days till I could become a mom. I knew that I wanted to have a big family and then I wanted to have a lot of kids, but that was kind of the extent that I thought about it, which I think maybe is a little bit unique. Like I know, at least when I talk to a lot of women now, I grew up in a very conservative religious environment that stressed being a wife and mother kind of as like the pinnacle of womanhood and like what, the purpose in life, fulfillment, all those things. And so I think for a lot of my peers, they had a lot of expectations around motherhood and how it was going to make them so happy and do all of these amazing things for them. And for better or for worse, I didn't really have that. I was just like, yeah, I'll be a mom someday. So I just went on my way and didn't give it that much thought until a few years after we'd been married and I found out I was pregnant. And I was like, wait, I want to do this and I want this, but like not yet. I'm still in my prime, I'm still have a lot of goals and dreams and things. And I immediately kind of felt like it was my job now, in order to be a good mom, to put all of that to the side or on the back burner so that I could fully be present for my kids, to be a good mom, to do all the things and to be with them all the time and be taking care of them, because I very much equated the taking care of kids with being a mom, to the point where I very much had an attitude towards women who had careers outside of the home, and I felt like I was better than them, right? And I like had all these ideas in my mind about what it meant to be a good mom. And so I needed to put everything aside in order to do that. And so I had my first kid, and we were kind of the mentality of like, if we know we want to have a lot of kids, like here we are, we started the family, like let's just get them here as quick as possible. And for us, that was a good fit. I'm not saying that's a good fit for everyone. And also it's not even something that we really have as much control over as we think we do. But I just kept having kids and kept having this moral high ground of, oh, I'm so great. Look at me. I'm giving up everything for my kids and everyone's better for it, right? Until I finally was like, well, what if everyone's actually not better for it? Because I got to the point where I realized that my air of superiority over women who worked outside of the home, who like weren't the ones with their kids all day, actually came from a place of jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of like, well, yeah, if I had the choice, like obviously I would choose that too if I could, but like it's important for me to be a good mom. So of course I'm not going to choose that because this is so much more important. What could be more important than taking care of my kids and being there for my kids and being with my kids? And it got to this place where I was like, I finally had this wake up call of something's off here, right? And so I started exploring that, and it dawned on me that yes, I was home with our kids all day and my husband was out working for a company, making money, but he was also building a relationship with our kids, and at
Yeah.
times a much stronger one than mine, because I was allowing myself to be so absorbed by the actual work, both mental and physical, of taking care of little kids, that I didn't even have the capacity to be building a relationship along the
Mm-hmm.
way. And so I started realizing like, okay, hold on. What I'm calling motherhood, which is the physical tasks of, changing diapers and getting up in the night and driving kids places or whatever, those things don't inherently build a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm not using those things to build a relationship, what are they for, first of all? And also, oh, it's actually possible to build a relationship while not doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband was the perfect example of that, right?
There's so much in there, and knowing the work that you do now and your message now, I think hearing your story, I mean, like I have full body chills listening to it. It's like the kind of thing where it's almost like the example of why this is so important. I think there's so many women, and you talked about it. It was even before you became a mom. You knew you were going to be a mom in the future, but it wasn't even on your mind at that point. But you knew that as soon as you became a mom, it meant sacrificing everything for your kids. And you were so aware of that when it happened, you're like, okay, I guess this is happening. I guess I'm shedding that. And that right there, regardless of how you're growing up, regardless of who you're being raised by, right? Whether you come from a family where that's what's shown to you or not, it is so deeply ingrained in the messages we receive. And so we have to be having these conversations, not to say, Mom, you shouldn't be the one being the primary caregiver. That's not even kind of what it's about.
No.
It's about knowing that the importance of us as mothers, as this parent to our children, is so beyond this work that we do that we call mothering.
Yes. And I love that point. And I want to, take that a little bit further. So I have this business and this platform that I call Redefining Motherhood,
Mm-hmm.
where I help women understand that the relationship of motherhood and the job of caregiving are different things. And people ask me, but why? Like, why does that matter? Like, why is that important? And to me, it's so clear. It's like, well, because it's important, right? Like, it matters. And ultimately, very, very recently, I've come to the realization that it matters because motherhood's not an identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that it was, because when I became a mom, like you were saying, I felt like, okay, who I was before is no longer relevant. I am now stepping into this new role and this new identity and this new purpose. And a lot of people will even use this language as like, oh yeah, the mother dies. The former version of the mother dies when the child is born, and like,
Mm-hmm.
I accepted that as like truth or whatever. And then it was like, well, but no, once I realized motherhood is a relationship I'm a part of and caregiving is the work that I'm doing, neither of those things are me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still here. And that's
Yeah.
important and that matters. What I bring to the relationship is so important. But because of the way we talk about motherhood, what we bring becomes focused on what we provide for our children, not who we are that we're bringing to the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so that ultimately is my goal with redefining motherhood and helping women see this distinction in being like, you are separate from the relationship. You are separate from the job, whether that job is caregiving or whether that job is any other job that you choose. And because you're separate from it, you can actually decide like, oh, I don't like caregiving. And that doesn't mean anything about being a good mom or being a bad mom. It's just a preference.
Yeah.
And you don't have to wrap it up in this identity of like, oh, well, what does that mean about me? Like, if I don't love being with my kids 24/7, why did I even have kids? What was the point? It's like, well, the point was because you're building a relationship and they're going to be kids for a very, very short time of that relationship.
Yeah, it's everything you're saying. It's so just, it's like, oh, it just hits you because it's so true. I mean, this is the Worthy Mother podcast. We talk a lot about our worth and what that means. And when we're putting our worth as a human into these things that we really, first of all, don't have that much control over. And second, they have nothing to do with our worth. And I just want to, there's something I want to pull there and kind of bring to my life. I feel like just in general, I'm kind of a hot mess when it comes to like keeping the house in any sort of order. It's like,
Amen.
I've never been, you should have seen my room as a little kid. Like I left the Barbies everywhere. It's just like not something that I have the skill of doing well. And it's also something that we see as being tied to motherhood. Moms keep the house clean, whether you're working outside of the home, working in the home with a paid job, or being a full-time caregiver to your children. It's expected that moms will be good at keeping the house clean. That's kind of an equivalent. If you're a good mom, you're good at that. And
Yep.
it really messes with you then when you're like, well, obviously, I'm not very good at this whole mothering thing because XYZ, I'm not good at that.
Because I
right?
always have dishes in my sink or there's
Yeah.
my floor has crumbs or whatever it is, right?
And you
Yeah.
can't figure it out. And so obviously, God, you're just bad at this. And it's like, well, like if you stop and think about it, keeping the house clean, organized, whatever, like only gets harder when you have kids because when it's just you, like it's just you and it's hard enough, right? Like we've got so much
Right.
stuff like, and so it's like, that doesn't really have anything to do with being a mom. It's not like I get pregnant, birth a baby, and now all of a sudden I've got my shit together. Like,
Right. It
that's not
comes
how it
back to the
works.
identity thing, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like, oh, wait, you mean I'm actually still the same person that I was before I birthed a child? Like, oh, I couldn't keep my room clean before and now I still can't. What? Like, what a concept,
Yeah, right?
right? Like,
Right?
I'm still here. It's still me. Yes,
Yeah.
I birthed a child and now I have this new relationship that I'm a part of, but it didn't change who I am. I'm still a
Yeah.
mess. I'm still not good at keeping on top of household tasks. And now it's like, I don't have to make that a reflection of me as a mom.
Yeah.
It can still be a reflection of me as a person in the fact that like,
Totally.
okay, this is not one of my
It's like
skills.
maybe I want to work on that, but
Right. Like I can improve it. I can decide it doesn't matter, right? I have
Yeah.
whatever means I want to go down. But now it doesn't have to be tied back to how good of a mom I am or the type of mom I am. And we love to do this as a society. We love to, once women become moms, we love to tie everything that they do, everything that they wear, their haircuts, right? Oh, a mom cut. Like, oh, you got a mom haircut. What does that mean? You know? It's like, oh,
totally.
a mom bun. You're wearing a mom bun. What?
Same messy bun I wore
Everything.
when I was in my early 20s.
Exactly. It's like even the car I was driving. Before it was a car, then I had kids. It's a mom car. No, it's just a car. But when we're hearing this messaging constantly, we think like that's just who I am. I am a mom. That is who I am. And I'm saying, no, that's a relationship that you are honored to be a part of. And that's a big deal being part of a relationship.
Yeah.
And yes, when we enter relationships, parts of our priorities are likely going to change. You know, like we're going to shift into what works best for that relationship, but it doesn't change who we are at our core. And that's what the message I really want women to hear is that like you matter. And like you were saying, your worth is far beyond what you are for other people.
Yeah.
You have an inherent worth that is not tied to your relationships or your job. You're worthy, period, in who you are. And it's hard to remember that when we start justifying our worth by what we can do for others.
Yeah, I always love like thinking about our kids in that context of like we can acknowledge that their worth isn't in how well they please us or please other people. And I think it can be really hard when we're talking about ourselves to understand what that means. It's like, no, but especially, I mean, as women, people pleasing is something that we've all developed for the most part in terms of like growing up and knowing that like we want to make people happy and whatever that means, right? Whatever that kind of turns into as an adult. But it can be easier sometimes to think about our kids and knowing and acknowledging that they are good enough no matter what. It's true of you too.
I think about this quote all the time, and it comes back to this social conditioning, because honestly, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a lot of social conditioning from the time that we are literally children.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's any one person's fault, right? Like this is just, we're a product of society in every different way and what we see in movies and how we're talked to and how we observe and everything, right? And I heard this quote a couple of years ago. I literally saw it on like a TikTok, and it was totally unrelated to motherhood. This person was not referencing it to motherhood, but immediately when I saw it, I was like, it said, people who do not feel worthy of love settle for feeling needed.
Oh.
And I was like, that is the problem with the way we talk about motherhood in society, because we equate being needed with being loved. And if our kids need us, they love us.
Yeah.
And I know that can be hard to hear. Like, I know this is not a comfy conversation for a lot of people. So like, give yourself all the grace, right? Like, this is not a personal attack. We've all been there. But just acknowledge that like, I don't show up for my kids because they need me. Because the reality is like, there are a lot of other people who could help meet their needs. It doesn't have to be me.
Yeah.
I show up because I want to be there. I want to develop a relationship with them. Not because they need it, but because I want it. It's about me, right? Like I want to be that person for them. But also I want to recognize that I want other people to be in their village too, right? We talk about it takes a village to raise a child. And I think that applies both in the physical aspect of like caregiving is not meant to fall on one person all the time. It is meant to be a community. And also, I bring that to the relationship. What does it mean to raise a child, right?
Yeah.
I always equated raising a child with being the one to take care of the child, because we hear that often. Women will say, oh yeah, I was working for Amazon and then I quit for a few years to raise my kids and then I ended up at blah, 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 right? We hear that. And I was totally like, I internalized that, especially at the beginning when I was like on my little high horse of, oh, I'm the best mom because I'm at home raising my kids. And at that same time where I had this realization of like, oh, my husband is also building a relationship with my kids. My husband is also raising our kids just as much as I am. We are raising them together, even though he's gone 8, 9, 10 hours a day, right? And so then I was like, oh, to raise a child means to build a relationship with a child. So now it takes a village to raise a child means our kids need relationships with lots of different people that's going to help them develop and grow into the people that they're meant to become. So we can apply it both in caregiving, like, yes, let's ease that burden of caregiving. So it's not only on the mom, because traditionally we use the word motherhood and caregiving interchangeably. And so we assume that that's the mom's job, but it's not. It is all of our responsibility, right? And then also, let's give our kids lots of opportunities to build relationships with so many different people.
Absolutely. And it's like we will make sure that their needs, the things that they need, the caregiving is happening, whether that's with us, whether that's between two parents, whether that's between a daycare provider and so many other people, all hands on deck.
Of people.
It's like it doesn't mean not giving the care to our children. It's about knowing that caregiving is not the same as motherhood. Like it's that simple. It comes down to that. I'm curious, you post a lot on social media. You have a pretty good following on Instagram and sharing your message. Do you receive pushback to these kind of things that you say, these statements, motherhood is not caregiving, motherhood is a relationship, caregiving is a job? What kind of things do people say that aren't so favorable, I guess?
Yeah, the main pushback that I get, which again, I get it because
Yeah.
this is a very tender topic for a lot of people. But the main one is that caregiving is motherhood because I use caregiving to build the relationship.
Okay.
So I wouldn't have the relationship if I wasn't caregiving. So this is the analogy that I like to use that, again, the message might not be for everyone. And I understand that. I recognize that. I do have this like, but if we could just sit down and talk about it and you could just, hear a little bit more, I think you would like it. I think it would be helpful. But also, I know that, like you said, the people pleasing thing, right? It's like, I just want everyone to get it. But this analogy that I have can help people sometimes. So basically, if you're going to build a house, you're going to use tools to build the house. You're going to use hammers and saws and nails and whatever, all these things, boards, right? But those individual pieces are not the house.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if we just reframe that a little bit, when you're building a relationship, you can use caregiving, you can use the tasks of driving kids to school or making dinner or whatever. You can use those tasks to build the relationship, but ultimately the tasks are not the relationship. And different people are going to use different tools, and you're going to use different tools at different stages of the house. So when your kids are babies, think about building a relationship with a newborn is entirely different than building a relationship with a 16-year-old, which is entirely different than building a relationship with a 40-year-old. And these are all parts of the relationship of motherhood. We get so fixated on motherhood, the first 18 summers and, like that time that they're in our home, the caregiving years.
Mm-hmm.
And we get so fixated on those that we forget that like, that's literally just a small section of the timeline of the relationship.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to like, the mom bun and the mom car or whatever. Like my mom has 6 kids that live in 6 different states. And does she drive a mom car? We don't call her car a mom car now that the kids are out of the house. It was only a mom car when she was a caregiver.
Yeah.
It's a caregiver car. Or even I just like to call it a kid car, right? It's a car that takes kids around.
Totally.
Not because of the relationship, because of the job.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways to look at it and think like, okay, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. And I think you speak just so clearly about it.
I'm glad you feel like it's clear because
Yeah.
a lot of people don't.
Well, I think it's really understanding ourselves as, yes, this important person in our children's lives. And we're important for a lot of reasons in their lives. And I mean, I'm thinking like later today, I go to trivia with my mom and my aunt every Thursday, pretty much. Like we have a great
fun.
relationship, and it's in that relationship now that she cares for me. When I need something, I call my mom, and it's like, it's thinking about that relationship can help see, not everybody has a great relationship with their parents, but
Right.
if you have a relationship with your parent, thinking about that context of now that I'm an adult and have my own life, what does that relationship look like? And what do I want my relationship with my kids to look like when they're out of the house? And what do I want their perception of me to be?
Yes.
Because if that relationship was built on all of the tasks, which this is not to say that if you're the one doing all of the tasks, this is what's going to happen. But if that relationship is solely built on you doing the tasks for them, then what's the perception? The perception is that your value as a mother is in the task that you did for them, that they now owe you maybe for the tasks you did for them. Like there's a lot of ways that if we're saying it's the tasks that build the relationship and we're sticking to that, that can not be the best for the end result that we get with our children. And so again, if you're the one who's doing most of the caregiving, that's not to say that that's what your kids are going to think, but we want to be conscious of the way we talk about motherhood, the language we use with motherhood, so that our kids can see that we're people. Because my guess is you want your children, whether you have boys or girls, to grow up and know that they are important individuals who are worth advocating for. And if they decide to have children, that they can maintain their sense of worth outside of being a parent, right? Or if they are a boy and, grow up and get married and have kids, that they can also acknowledge that everything doesn't fall on their female partner, right? It's like, there's so many
the caregiving is not a woman's job, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's just part of having kids. Like kids need caregivers.
Yep, they do.
The gender of the caregiver is less relevant, right? Than the quality of the caregiver.
Totally. So something that I really find interesting, and it's coming up a lot in this conversation, and it comes up a lot in the things that I see with your content that you put out there, is talking about the value of caregiving. Because I think oftentimes when we have conversations about motherhood and separating the person from all these tasks that come along with motherhood, the things that we talk about like they are motherhood, right? It can feel like, well, if you're saying you don't have to, quote, just be a mom, then you're saying it's not valuable then if you are the full-time caregiver at home with your kids, if you're a stay-at-home mom, right? And I always try and be really conscious about that because I think it's so important that we value caregiving. Again, like you just said, it's something that has to happen. We have to care for our kids. And if we're saying, oh, you're just a mom, you're just at home with the kids, okay, that's a huge deal. Like I pay someone at daycare to take care of my kids for a few hours in the day. Obviously, this is something that has like monetary value, let alone the value of like making sure our kids are healthy and cared for and all of that. So I would love to just kind of get your thoughts on that with how your perspective of motherhood being the relationship, caregiving being the job, how does that account then for the value of caregiving? Because I see it being quite a powerful way of looking at it to actually value caregiving.
Yeah, well, that's exactly how I saw it, because before, when I thought of myself of like, oh, I'm just a mom, right?
Yeah.
And think about like in elementary school, right? When everybody went around and said like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's like, oh, a firefighter and a nurse and a doctor, a teacher, whatever. And then inevitably some girl would say a mom, and that was like oh, like so cute, moving on. And once I realized like, wait, we're comparing apples and oranges,
Mm-hmm.
because that's why so many women have this like, well, wait, like I want to be a mom, but also I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a mom. And it feels like you have to make this choice. Once we realize like, okay, motherhood is a relationship, done, period. That is what motherhood actually is. Now, what am I going to do for work?
Mm-hmm.
And am I going to be a caregiver for my kids? I think it's hard because we also primarily call it being a stay-at-home mom, right?
Yeah.
Or people will say a full-time mom. And I have just really tried to change my language away from using the word mom at all, because then it feeds this idea that it is part of motherhood, or that it is motherhood, which is why I use the language of primary caregiver.
Yeah.
But it's hard to realize the value of it when you're not getting paid, ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Because my husband goes to his job, and then every 2 weeks we get money that is like a very tangible evidence that the work that he is doing is worth something.
Yeah.
And when you're not getting that paycheck as a primary caregiver of your own children, it's really hard to wrap your brain around. So I do think it's helpful to just be aware of what people charge to be caregiver for your kids. Because like you said, if you're not going to do it, you have to pay someone else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though you're not getting paid outright, you are preventing a cost for your
Totally.
family. Does that make
Totally.
sense? Like,
It absolutely does.
and I think this is important to realize too, that let's say you're hearing this conversation and, you're mulling it over for a couple of days and you're like, you know what? I actually don't love being a caregiver. I actually would love to go back to my job at the bank, but for whatever reason, you feel like you can't, because you're like, well, I'd be paying more in childcare than I would be making at the bank. It's easy to think like, I need to be making more money than I'm saving by not working outside of the home. But the reality is, childcare is not a woman's expense. It's a family expense. Okay, this is another way to think about it. Like, let's say your husband has this job that he hates. He comes home every single day. He's so grumpy. He's like, this is the worst. It's affecting your marriage. It's affecting your kids, right? He's just not in a good place. And all of a sudden, he has this job opportunity open up that's his dream job. He knows the coworkers, he knows the work. It's going to be amazing, but it's a pay cut. You're going to have to financially sacrifice for him to take this job. Would you say like, absolutely, we'll make it work? Yes, let's figure it out. Would you encourage him in that? I'm willing to say it'd be a conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now allow yourself that same opportunity. If being home with your kids all day is hurting your relationship with your spouse. It's hurting your relationship with your kids. And you have this other opportunity, but it's going to be a pay cut, right? Like you're going to be paying more in childcare. You are also worthy of that conversation and that opportunity, just like you would not hesitate if your husband came to you with that. And again, this is not to say that, you know, you need to be working outside of the home or you need to be working inside of the home. This is an opportunity to like separate yourself out from your job of caregiving and your relationship and be like, what do I want?
Yeah.
Because your preferences matter. Just like your husband's preferences and his job matter because you know it affects your entire family.
The way that you framed that and the way you just presented that of like this very logical look, it's not to say that you're always going to make the decision with the pay cut or the decision to do exactly what you want. Because, you know, there's so many factors. There's so many factors in our lives. But the key here is that we have to consider why we are automatically making certain decisions, what societal conditioning is causing us to make those decisions without a second thought. That might feel really crummy, right? The decisions that we're like, I don't like this decision, but it's the thing that makes the most sense financially. And when we can think about that, I mean, I'm like, anybody who heard that, if that struck a chord, rewind, go back and listen to that little section, because it is so important that we acknowledge that we are worthy of the conversation.
Yes.
What we want to be doing with our time. First of all, there's no guilt and shame. I mean, you might feel guilt and shame, but there's no reason for guilt and shame if being the full-time caregiver for your kids doesn't feel good. That does not mean anything about you as a woman. It does not mean anything about you as a mother. And I'm really loving the way you're speaking about the language. I'm going to take that because I struggle with knowing how do we even, I don't like saying full-time mom because any mom is a full-time mom. You're a mom at any point in your life when you have kids and probably would drop everything if they absolutely need you. So it's
a
just,
full-time relationship. So all moms are full-time moms.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. And stay-at-home mom, you know, all of those things. It's really tricky to communicate things without using language. And I've talked about that here before, like the not knowing exactly how to say it. I love primary caregiver because it does, again, separate those things and gives value to that role, even if it's not, like you said, this like
because
paycheck.
It's a job. Like
it's a job.
Like people are paid as caregivers.
Yeah.
For
it is a job.
Or young people or whatever. Like we
yes.
acknowledge that as a job. But basically, like, how often do we hear, you know, like I'll go to work events with my husband at the company that he works for, and people will ask a woman in the room, like, what do you do? And she's like, oh, just, you know, just a mom, just have 3 kids, you know, it's just like, own it. Like, I am the full-time caregiver of 6 children or 2 children or whatever. I mean, everybody knows being a full-time caregiver of children, that is work.
Yeah.
Whether or not they've done it, and if they haven't done it, they don't even know. If they have done it, they do know. And so giving women the power back to like own the work that they are doing, it's not just like, oh, I'm mom. Like a lot of women shy away from that question. They say, I don't work. Right? That's what I heard my mom say all growing up. People would say, I don't work. Because she was a stay-at-home mom. I don't work, I'm just stay-at-home. It's like, please. Do you know how much work it is to be taking care of little kids?
Yes.
It's exhausting. And they've even come out with this study that, and they say like, being a mom is one of the most stressful jobs in the world. And it's like, I appreciate what they're trying to do because they're bringing awareness that this is work. But I don't like the way they're doing it because now they're equating it with being a mom.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, it's caregiving. Dads can also do that. There are single fathers out there or fathers in a dual parent relationship where the father is the primary caregiver. But it's like, it really, regardless of how powerful and positive the message is, it's perpetuating this equating of being a mom with all of that stuff that it
just a job.
Yeah, it really takes away from understanding the importance of being a mom, because then we use this stuff and you hate being asked, what do you do for work? And all of these things, it just diminishes the job of caregiving and the relationship of motherhood. It's negative for all of it. Yes. And so I think just being conscious of it isn't going to fix it. You still will face society and the questions and not knowing how to answer things, but it's knowing that we can start to even change our language, and that has an impact, because especially too, as mothers, as people who are influencing our children in these really powerful ways, right? As parents, like
Yeah.
it's a huge presence in your child's life. And so embodying this, understanding this, changing the way we speak about what it means to be a mom, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be somebody providing care or working a paid job outside of the home. Like the way we talk about these things will then impact our children as they grow up, which is impacting the future generations. And that's how these societal things change.
Right. And I love that I have that language to talk to my kids about it, because they'll ask randomly. Like literally a couple weeks ago, one of my kids was like, "Mom, what do you do for work?" And I was like, "Oh, great question. I'd love to tell you." I said, I have two jobs. My primary job is being the caregiver for you guys. I'm here to make you lunch and take you to school and, do that stuff. And then I said, I also have another job when right now I have a babysitter named Lily. I'm like, when she comes, then I work on my business where I help educate women online, and I could just acknowledge that this is work and this is work, and one is not better than the other. They're both work and I do them both. And that's the thing that's so interesting too, was that when I came to this, back to the decisions, as far as like asking yourself this question, like, do I want to take the pay cut to get a job elsewhere? Right. I asked myself that question, and it was like, okay, now that I realize this is a job, and if I choose a different job, it doesn't make me a bad mom. It has nothing to do with being a mom, because I know that I can have a great relationship with my kids, regardless of whether or not I'm their primary caregiver. Ultimately, it was like, I actually want to be a primary caregiver.
Yeah.
I've had different nanny or babysitter situations that have come like 15 hours a week, right? But ultimately, I wanted it, but I never felt like I actually chose it.
Yeah.
So to your point earlier of like, it's worth the conversation. And at the end of the conversation, you might decide, oh, actually, I do want this. But how much more powerful is that coming from oh, I actually want this, than, oh, we can't afford to have me work outside of the home.
Yeah.
You can come from like, oh, actually, the financial goals that we have, it makes more sense right now that I want to do this so that we can reach those goals, or whatever it is.
This is how I'm contributing financially to the family.
Yes.
And if you frame it like that, if that's the issue, it's like that is a then contribution financially to the family. If the alternative is,
and I want to do
money.
it,
yes,
because of this other outcome that I also want. Because
totally.
in life, some things, every yes is a no, like they say, right? But just being conscious of those yeses and not feeling like society or whoever or whatever made that decision for you is what I want women to, like, I want them to regain their power and their authority of like, oh, okay, that's what motherhood is. Cool. Figuring that out. This is what my job is right now. What do I actually want my job to be? How do I want that to look? Instead of just being like, well, I'm a mom, so this is what my life looks like. And, oh, well, I'm a mom, so that means I don't get any time to myself. Well, I'm a mom, so that means I need to be burned out all the time. Like, well, I'm a mom, so I never get a break. Like, wait, stop. Like, let's think this through for a second. Because motherhood is a relationship, and you're right, you don't get a break from the relationship. But expecting yourself to never get a break from the job of caregiving, whoa, let's talk about it, because that's just not going to be healthy for you or anybody in your life.
It is a hard job.
It's hard. Caregiving is hard, period.
And
I'm so glad that I can say, because motherhood is also hard. Navigating relationships, also hard. But seeing that those are different things that I'm working on, for me, it's really helpful to be like, okay, before, when I hadn't practiced this as much, right? And I would hear myself saying, because that was when I was pregnant with my first, and I mentioned this before, it was not a planned timeline for me. And I got a little bit depressed about it. Her whole pregnancy, I was dreading becoming a mom. And everything I heard from everybody that I talked to and everything I saw on social media was motherhood is hard. Motherhood is hard. Motherhood is hard. Motherhood is hard. And I hated it. Because I was like, why do people even have kids? Everybody hates it. This is the worst. This is going to be the worst thing that's ever happened to me, right? Thankfully, I'm on the other side, and I can acknowledge now, instead of just saying like motherhood is hard, like that just felt so abstract. And like, what does that mean? Like now I can say relationships are hard and caregiving is hard. And my brain has such an easier time processing that and validating that and just being like, And that's okay. Because relationships are hard and amazing. There's so much growth and there's so much learning and there's so much fun and laughter and joy and great things come from relationships. And they're a lot of work. And then caregiving, the job, the work of taking care of little kids is also hard. And it's so nice to be like, wow, I hated my job today. My job sucked today.
Yeah.
And not have it be like, I'm a terrible mother. Why did I have children? This is the worst. I hate this. It's like, oh no, everybody has hard days on their job. Even when you're working your dream job, you have days that you come home and you're like, well, that wasn't it.
Totally. It allows you to release some of that mom guilt that so many of us feel because society tells us we're supposed to be a certain way. And when you can acknowledge, like, oh, that was a shitty day of work today. And it can absolutely be. And it doesn't mean any less about you as a caregiver because caregiving is hard work. And it also, I love how that separation of it also does not detract from the relationship. That is a separate thing. And there is separate work that goes into that. And it really does like release some of the pressure to feel like you love every moment of all of the things that we do as parents and as caregivers.
Because relationships are built over time, over thousands of interaction, over days and months and years, decades. And so, of course, we're not going to get it right in our relationships all the time. But that's the point of relationships because that's how we learn. And just being able to go to our kids and be like, you know what? I messed up today. Like I did not handle that how I wanted to. And I'm sorry. Where do we go from here? You know?
Yeah.
That is what it's all about, is modeling for them. Like, no, I'm not perfect. We're not perfect. And that's perfectly okay. And it's going to bring us closer together because we can talk about it and we can go forward, building the relationship over time.
Absolutely. Oh, I could like just talk about this all day with you.
Well, same. So sorry if I cut you off like 1,000 times because I also want to hear what you have to say.
That's a sign of a great conversation, right? Like the just constantly, having responses and sparking little ideas and things like that. Before we do wrap up the conversation, something that I love asking moms at the end of the episodes. Our guests are all moms, and I really feel like it is important to normalize self-care and taking care of ourselves. We've spoken a little bit about making sure that you do have a break from caregiving, right? I love asking our guests, how do you take care of yourself? And what advice do you have for other moms to just make sure that they are also caring for themselves regularly?
Yeah, I love this question. And I have two things that immediately come to mind, and they're related. So the first one that I thought of was having something to look forward to is a form of self-care. And I heard that, I think it was on a podcast. I wish I could remember the source so I could credit them, but it was in reference to the pandemic and how, anything that you had that you were looking forward to was essentially canceled for the foreseeable future. And our mental health as a society plummeted, right? And that resonated with me because I think sometimes we can overthink self-care. And some people have like ideas of like, oh, well, this doesn't count as self-care or this does count. Or, you see the one where it's like taking a shower does not count. And it's like, well, it could though. I mean, I don't think that's all, right? Like, I think you could do more than that. But like, if you're really looking forward, like if I'm camping for 3 days, when I get home and I'm looking forward to that shower, you better believe that shower is self-care because like I am looking forward to that shower or whatever it is. Sometimes going to Costco by myself is self-care because I love Costco and I love going by myself. So if I have that like to look forward to, like, okay, on Saturday morning, my husband's taking the kids and I'm going to go to Costco. For me, that works, but maybe that's not for you, right? Like maybe going to the grocery store by yourself, you're like, absolutely not. And that's fine. I think it's so personalized. So that's one idea. And then the other thing that I thought of is because I think self-care and burnout kind of go hand in hand, right? And there's Eve Rodsky is an author. She's written a couple of books, Fair Play and Unicorn Space. I really like Unicorn Space. And she said something on a podcast that was the antidote to burnout is being interested in your own life, which I really loved because the reality is you can work really hard, long hours at something and actually feel energized by it if the work that you're doing is something that you're really interested in. So figuring out like and this is what I do in coaching a little bit, is like helping women reconnect with like, okay, once we've stripped away the relationships and the jobs, who are you underneath it all? And what lights you up? Like, what are you excited about? And how can you bring those things both to your family, to your relationships, and also just to the world? Because so much of that gets lost once we start assuming this identity of being a mom and doing all the mom things and thinking all the mom ways and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I will answer it for me now that I have given those things. I love meeting with other women, just talking with other women, like going to networking events and stuff. Absolutely love it. Re-energizes me. I think of it as self-care, because especially when your kids are little, and my kids are older now, so it's not, my oldest is 8, so they're not like very old, but like just having adult conversation, or being deprived, I guess you could say, of adult conversation when my kids were little was so hard. Being alone all day and just like the loneliness. So listening to podcasts is literally how I made it through. So I love podcasts. And then just like having time to pursue, like I said, like my things that light me up, like my business of redefining motherhood. I think of those things as self-care.
I love that. I love all of that. I think there's so many kind of mindset pieces there of just thinking about how we can do things in our life to bring us that interest and bring us that joy, whether that's having things to look forward to or just getting to know what it is that you are interested in and making the space for that, whether it's in your work that you do or just something that you make sure you have time for. Because it really is, if you are, I like the idea of if you're interested in it, not just if you enjoy it, but if you're interested in it, it's going to be stimulating in a way that is energizing. And I think that's a really great thing to just know, so that when you're kind of deciding how to spend your time or deciding what do I need right now, I'm not really sure, but I'm not feeling super fulfilled, thinking about what interests you and how you can kind of incorporate that into your life more so that you're excited about things. It makes a huge difference then in how you show up in the things that maybe you're not so excited for.
Yeah, exactly. And I was talking with a client about this because she was feeling burned out. And we were talking about, I was like, well, what are you interested in? And she's like, well, like I like to go on walks and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, okay, that's something that you enjoy doing, but there's a difference between, exactly like what you said, there's a difference between something that you enjoy and something that you're interested in.
Yeah.
And so like really lighting up those parts of your brain that you kind of have to go out of your way to do that.
Yeah.
When you are so consumed with caregiving of little kids, and you really have to make it a deliberate effort. And it can feel exhausting because you're like, oh, I'm already doing so much. But the reality is that it is energizing, and it's far more helpful than scrolling Instagram, which I am, very guilty of as well.
We all do it.
And it is sometimes, it can be a form of self-care too.
If you're in the right parts of TikTok, there can be really interesting things.
Really
sometimes.
Interesting. That's very true. That is very true. The University of TikTok, like they say.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yes. Hannah, where can listeners find you? I love what you post, so I recommend everyone goes and follows you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. On Instagram, I'm Freckled Han, so people can never understand how I say that online, but hopefully we can link to it. But my name is Hannah, and I have freckles. So Freckled Han, H-A-N, that's primarily where I post. And then I do have a podcast that's I'm like posting twice a month-ish right now. The podcast is called Rantish, and it's honestly just like all over the place. I just talk about things I'm rantish about, and that can be so random. But yeah, that's another place. And then I do have a website, freckledhan.com, if you want to go there. But Instagram really is the best place to find me.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll have it all linked in the show notes. So super easy to find. Just click on the little description and you can find out how to get in contact with Hannah, how to follow her good stuff and learn more. Hannah, thank you so much for being here. I'm like when a conversation just goes even better than you could have thought. I'm on a high right now with that.
You're so nice. I joke about this on my podcast too. Every time I hang up from a podcast, I say that there's this phenomenon called podcast amnesia, where you end the call and you're like, what just happened for the last hour? I have no idea what I said. I don't know if I finished half of my sentences. So hopefully you guys were able to make sense of a lot of this rambling that I've done over the last hour.
So good. So good. Thank you for being
for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for tuning in. You are worthy, Mama.